So we're doing a restorative practice today, and we will do another one on Monday. And then a week from today, instead of starting a standing practice week on a Friday, I always like to start our new weeks on Mondays. I'm offering an inversion workshop, if you're interested, from 8 to 9, our normal class time, but to go over shoulder stand and headstand and various modifications and props. So I welcome you to come, and I'll be more kind of upfront at the screen and helping you guys with your individual poses. But these two poses are just really great to always include in your practice. I haven't been doing them as often with the virtual classes just because I feel it's a little risky when we're not together and I can't help you directly. But I thought this would be a nice approach to start to incorporate those back in if we can kind of learn how we can set ourselves up for a safe inversion or modified version of the inversion. I would like to go back to including those poses in our classes or some version of those poses. So we're going to start in seated swastikasana and just your cross-legged position. It's the 27th today, so just kind of always challenging that habitual nature that we have and coming into your less automated cross-legged position. I'm going to spend a little time balancing the torso over the pelvis. Oftentimes we have to bring shoulders back. Oftentimes we have to rebalance the weight over the sitting bones. We really want to start with the legs feeling heavy and feeling the thigh bones releasing toward the floor. And it's only once we have that sensation that we can really bring any sense of lightness to the trunk, to the spine. So when you feel like you have both pieces, the foundation of the legs and the pelvis, and you have the lightness of the spine and the torso and the alignment, then join your hands together in front of the heart. Lowering the eyes toward your cheeks, toward your heart, away from your brain. Just kind of starting with the heaviest parts of your body and just continuing to settle not only to the floor, but through the floor. Maybe out of that, feeling the resistance of the spine, lifting upwards, lifting all the way out through the top of the head. As you keep the legs heavy, the shoulders releasing, the gaze pointed down, softening the belly. As you're ready, bowing towards your heart. Let your hands release down. When you're ready, lift your head. Let your eyes gently open. Welcome. We're going to start in a supported version of child's pose. It's different supports than we usually do. And we do want to create something for the head. So you're going to need 2 blocks for your hands, for your elbows. You'll need your strap. And then if you have an additional something or another for your forehead to rest on, it could be another block, it could be a blanket or a small pillow, just something that will meet your head for support. And then I'll show you the setup once you grab your things. So I'm going to be placing the strap around my wrists. And basically when you put your wrists into your strap, you just want to see that your wrists are just as wide as your shoulders. And if anything, they're a little more narrow We don't really want them a lot wider than the shoulders. If you normally need support for the buttocks or anywhere else with the legs, you can take that additionally to what we're going to use, because we do want to feel anchored. And we're going to take the tall blocks for the elbows. And then, of course, something for the head, which might be a block or a blanket. So that's your setup. And the knees, of course, are going to go wide. Your feet are together. You might need to kind of come into the position and make some adjustments so that your props are positioned correctly. So take some time with that. And we're going to place the arms out so that the palms face. Your head will rest, your forehead on whatever you place there for your head. And if there's shoulder discomfort here, it's usually resolved drawing the long arm bones back into the shoulders rather than kind of hanging on an unhinged shoulder joint. So usually that discomfort is because we haven't given the arm bones and the shoulders any direction, and we're just kind of straining the joint. So you just kind of plug those long arm bones into your shoulders. Hopefully that relieves it. If not, try to grab your opposite elbows and don't worry about the extended arms. We don't want to be here in suffering. So there's more of an extensive quality of the trunk in this position. If your arms are fully extended, you're reaching out gently through your fingernails. And every time you exhale, the dorsal spine moves in toward the chest. For most of us, there's tension across the upper back, behind the heart, dense, heavy tension, kind of a thickness. So just letting that release, letting your heart gently open. Feeling the armpits elongating. We're going to be here another minute, just exploring the amount of lingering you can do in your exhalation here. This pose supports a deeper exhalation. Gently start to move the head away from the prop. You can start to bring your hands onto your blocks and come out of the pose. And we'll set up for a similar pose, but it's inverted. So we'll be on our backs in Prasarita. So you can use your two blocks. If you have wooden blocks, I don't know if anybody does, but if you have wooden blocks, I always prefer to put a thin blanket over that so it's not so edgy against your back body. But we'll use the blocks horizontally. And the block that goes across the shoulder blade region is probably a medium height. It might be low considering how tight you are. But then the head block is just going to meet your head wherever it needs to be, so your forehead and chin are level. We'll go into our dominant cross-legged position since we already took the non-dominant. And then the way I recline back is I kind of use my thumbs to stabilize that block so that I can make sure that my dorsal spine arrives onto that block. It's directly behind the breastbone. So the block provides that support to the chest. And then of course the head, you'll want to adjust your block so that you have your head level, forehead and chin level. And we're going to start with our arms more like a shavasana position, just to allow some spreading across the chest. So take your arms out 45 degrees, palms are facing up. Make sure that you've lifted and lowered the buttocks so that you've drawn the flesh of the buttocks away from the trunk. You should feel your mat kind of pulling the flesh of the buttocks toward your feet side, towards your end of your mat, away from the torso. Receiving the support, taking a few breaths just to sense the chest spreading, broadening, the shoulders releasing. You'll sense when you're ready to move the arms, you'll be kind of feeling a cue for more sensation. So you can go ahead and extend your arms just like you had on those blocks with your child's pose. And if it feels too extreme, you can go into your grabbing elbow position with your opposite hands. And if that is still too extreme, you can come into what I call a goal post position. So your elbows are just kind of extended out directly from the shoulder line. And then you have right angles at your elbows. And you're just kind of working toward deeper opening in the chest and shoulders. You might have to play with a few variations until you find the right one. If you're very open and your arms are extended and you find that your hands meet the floor, first of all, before you move them away, notice which, sometimes there's an imbalance. Maybe one hand is touching and the other isn't. And sometimes this is because of our props not being perfectly placed. But other times it's just information. You can sense a little more tightness, maybe in the hand, the side that's not touching the floor. Maybe there's more tightness in that shoulder, the chest. So it's just good information. Maybe you're feeling your hands meeting the floor evenly. But then if you are being stopped by the floor, go ahead and grab your elbows so that you can continue to open. And as we hold Paryanukasana, we're going to visualize the breath. And what we're going to do is just think about the inhale. And rather than letting the belly inflate when you breathe in, keep your belly like a valley. In other words, keep the belly with the spine. And then keep your sternum like a hill. And when you exhale, think about the work there being to not allow the sternum to sink. So when you exhale, keeping that breastbone really tall. When we keep the abdomen kind of thinner on the in-breath, it forces the breath to rise up into the chest, to spread to the outer rib cage. And just watching in our back bends that the eyes don't roll up in the head. So to kind of temper this exciting, upregulating pose, keep your gaze pointed toward your cheeks. We're going to start to move out of the pose. This is a big pose, so start with the arms coming back down alongside you. And then you'll bring your legs kind of knees together, feet on the floor. And I like to use a forearm to kind of roll off onto my forearm. It's a lot of height to come off of if you were on that middle height block, especially. And we're gonna come into our next pose. You're gonna start lying on your left hip side. And what we're gonna do is a prone version, meaning facing the floor version of revolving hand to big toe pose, Prasarita Padutanasana. Excuse me. From your left hip side, you're gonna bring your left leg out off your mat, perpendicular to your right leg as best you can. But the legs don't have to be stiff, stick straight. So just kind of forming a rough 90-degree angle with your legs. And then before you get too kind of perfected in the pose, you might need to keep a block or something handy. We're gonna make sure the forehead is resting. So you're gonna do your best. You're gonna come onto your forearms. The legs are in their rough 90-degree position. And you're taking a few moments just to bring the deeper twist into this. So don't rest your head just yet. Just be on your forearms and just gently kind of waiting out the contractive reflexes in the body. You're just kind of surrendering into this twist. And when you feel pretty level with the shoulders kind of more squarely facing the floor, then you can lower the head down whatever height you need to keep a nice neutral neckline. Just running a body scan. There'll be places in the body that are reluctant, they're not convinced, they're not on board. Those are the interesting places. So just kind of, sometimes just the light of awareness is enough to start to soften these areas, to start to be more accepting of this pose you're in, to let go of those resistances. Sometimes a little bit more encouragement is needed. You might play with shifting weight in your arms. You might come back up to your starting position and see if you can adjust the twist a little bit deeper and go back in. You might realize you need some padding under your left hip. So there are some sensations that need to be addressed with actual interventions. Sometimes they don't just melt away. Do your best to keep your shoulders settled. It might mean stepping your elbows out a bit wider. Maybe that means the head has to come down lower. Just paying attention to that. Just for the last minute here, imagine every time you breathe in, you're pulling the skull away from the sacrum. You're tractioning the spine, you're lengthening, extending the spine. filling up a small balloon between each set of vertebrae. And for the last several exhales, angling the right outer ribs down as you roll the left outer ribs up. Begin to inhale and lengthen out of the pose at the same time you're coming out of the big twist. And we'll move to the second side, starting on your right hip side. To get into the prone version of the pose, you're going to swing your right leg off your mat so that it's perpendicular to your left leg, perpendicular to your torso. And then you're going to spend a little time on your forearms or maybe your hands. Sometimes the forearms is premature, it's too soon for that. You might need to start on your hands. Just pay attention to your reactions. We don't want to ever be kind of fighting ourselves in our practice. And then you decide when it's time to place the head and come into that second stage of the pose, which is really letting the pose work on you. So we work on the pose, then it works on us. The lengthening inhalation, the skull moving away from the sacrum. Gently moving the rib cage, tilting the right rib cage up and the left rib cage down with the exhalations. And that action is really originated by the spine, but sometimes the image of the rib cage moving can help move the spine. So if it helps you to think about the spine moving rather than the rib cage, then do that. Taking some time with that hip that's against the floor, and notice if you're really surrendered there or maybe resisting the floor. If there's resistance, the twist will not be as deep. So work on that softer connection of the right hip against the floor. And for the last 5 inhales, try to lift the belly away from the floor as you breathe in. In other words, keep your belly with the spine. And you begin to lift your head and use the pressure of your hands on the floor to bring you up and out of that big twist. It's helpful to use an inhale to come out. We're going to do another prone position. We're going to do half frog position where we elevate one knee. The tip I like to offer is that the knee that's elevated is probably going to be on a block or blanket, and we don't want that on a smooth, slippery surface. So you might have to move we're going to start with the left knee elevated. So that means you might have to move towards the right end of your mat. Your right side body might be off your mat, but it won't be an effect on the pose. So I'll show you the shape. We'll be starting on our bellies. We're going to have the left knee stepping up. And if the block is too high, you might just use a thin blanket. And what we're attempting is to put the knee in line with the hip. So for some of us, your knee will be lower than your hip line. Just know that one day, someday, the knee directly straight out from the hip line is kind of what we're going for. And then also just be aware that this is not child's pose where the foot is narrower than the knee. Your heel should be in line with your knee. So I have my right side body off my mat, but again, that's okay because I really need the traction for this elevated left knee side. So I don't want to be sliding around. And then again, the work is kind of similar here. We're attempting to just take some time on our hip bones, kind of on our belly and a little bit propped up, just so that we can get our shoulders to become a little bit more square. And then when you feel you're ready, you're going to lower your head down and make sure your forehead comes onto something. It might be your own hands or fists. It might be another prop. And now sometimes, and I know a lot of us don't have this at home, but it is something that you might want to consider getting at some point, is to just add a little bit more here. I have these 10-pound sandbags, but you can add some weight just to encourage that nice deep groin opening. So if you start to lose enough sensation, there's a few options. You can elevate the knee. If you're using a block, you could turn that block up a level. You can also start to move your knee closer to your shoulder line. So you're starting to get into a little bit more compaction. When the groins are tight, it can affect the breath in a negative way. So I always like to include some groin openers on our pranayama weeks when we work with our breath. We're going to start to move into the second side. So just start to step your knee down. And you can just transfer your height to the other side, or you might want to turn on your mat. It's up to you. I like to turn so I can keep my view on you guys and you on me. And you might need different height on this side. So always making that fresh inquiry. And again, remember to spend a little time, maybe up on your forearms or on your hands, just to kind of work that right hip side down, to work that right shoulder to level with the left shoulder. And then try to lengthen yourself down, resting your head so that the sides of your trunk are even. You should be resting on the instep of the foot. Your right toe is pointing out to the side. Your right heel again should be aligning with the knee. And you might have really resistant groins. So again, that could be a matter of attention and waiting it out and breathing. It could be that you need to actually intervene and lower the height under your right knee. Just a few more breaths here. So to come out, raise your head, gently start to step your knee down. You can extend your leg back behind you. We're gonna kind of apply that big opening to the groins and see how it shows up in our reclining bound angle pose. But we're gonna use our supports differently. Oftentimes we use the spine-wise bolster, but today we're gonna use a bolster, or you can roll blankets, of course, to make a bolster. But it's going to cross behind the chest, again, in the dorsal spine. And you will want head support, so a block works just fine, or if you have something else you like to use. And we will bind the legs. We will put the legs into a strap. You can take some time preparing your sound angle strap. And once you have it, just dropping it down over your head, down to the hip line. And then just sliding it right under the toes. And try to have the tail on the side of your body that you pull toward you to tighten, so that it's easier for you when you, if and when you want to tighten the strap, you can just pull toward. It's a little awkward to pull away from yourself in this position. And then again, we want to make sure that the butt is kind of pulled away from the torso. So the resistant sticky mat is a great tool for that. You can kind of actually roll the flesh of your buttocks, kind of dragging it away from your torso. You can also sense how it lengthens the lumbar when you do that. And you're also trying to lower yourself down onto that bolster support so that it's meeting you, kind of giving you that peak sternum. And hip support if you need it under the knees, anywhere all the way up to the hip line. And then I brought out my sandbags because this is another one where if you have these, they really do assist greater depth in the groins and hips. Not everybody needs that, but if you are somebody that's hypermobile or very externally rotated in the hips, you might need a little bit more weight on you. So it's, for me, it's very helpful because I have pretty mobile external rotation in my hips. So then the arms get a little jammed up. There's a few options here. You could go back to your goalpost where you just have the upper arms kind of resting against the length of that prop. You could also go back to your arms extended overhead or your elbow grab. Just kind of play with it. We don't want to have the arms kind of purposeless. So find a place that feels good and opening. And make sure your chin is tilted toward your chest, not away. So you might need to kind of raise that block up to create that effect. This is another back bend, so you might sense the eyes rolling up in your head. Just kind of tempering the pose with the gaze toward the cheeks, the chin toward the chest toward the chin. Imagining your breath originating at the pelvic floor. Remember to keep your belly with the spine, not letting it poof out when you breathe in. And then notice how that creates that fountainhead of breath moving up and out in the chest. The work on the exhale is to not let the sternum sink. Be here another minute. And we'll start to come out of the pose, just letting the legs come out first. So you're just gently going to either loosen the belt if that's possible, or you could slip one of your feet out. And then try to step your feet wide and let the knees fall in together. You can bring your hands onto your chest or belly. Just noticing any feedback, any residuals, form of sensation, the form of breath. Maybe you've noticed some stilling of the mind already. And gently, you're gonna, when you're ready, move to your side. And we're going to take our last pose before we come into pranayama section of our class. We're going to stand up and take Prasarita Padutanasana. So the wide standing forward bend, by the way, this is an excellent substitute for headstand, which we'll talk about next week. But to get the crown of the head supported and down, inverted, is very therapeutic on many levels. It's also very quieting. So we can support ourselves from behind. If you have a wall behind you, you can always work against the wall. It makes the pose even more passive. You're going to want to prop your head. And some people, a chair is a better tool for that than trying to create any series of blocks. A chair might just work as well. And when I use a chair, I have my arms on the edge of the chair and my head on my arms. Your feet are wide, and you might have to do a couple attempts to see what you're going to need. for head support. It does vary from day to day and practice to practice. So you don't want to just rely on what happened in the past. So in yoga, we're always trying to uncondition ourselves, making every moment brand new. So once you have the support, feel free to come right into it. Just make sure you have your feet kind of broadened. They're not shrinking up or rolling out, or I call it bulldozing the small toe. So make sure you have broadness across the ball mounds and also across the heel. And then the arms can be a little bit in limbo land here. So if you have excess arm length, meaning your elbows are bent, I find it quieting to rest on the backs of the hands so the shoulders can really surrender. Feeling an opening to the outer ankles, but not letting that explode out, not exploiting that. So drawing the outer ankle bones in as the outer ankles open, keeping enough weight to the outer feet that your inner arches stay lifted. This is considered the first diaphragm in the body. The first upward draw of energy is that arch of your foot. So in a way, it relates to pranayama as well. Keeping that lifted, keeping the integrity of the feet and ankles. The legs are strong and firm. And hopefully the brain is resting quietly inside your skull. You might have to drop your height down at some point. Make sure that your head is meeting the prop. It's not being jamming quality into the prop. We want to feel like we move through the prop, not like we're truncated. Now start to lift your head and transfer weight to your hands. And you can start to walk your feet in so that you're able to come back down. We're going to set up now for pranayama. We're going to do a series of pranayama practices. So a few things before we do that. If you know you have trouble with your eyes closing with your own efforts, then you'll want something, even your strap tail over your eyes will be a good prop. Eye pillows as well if you own one. Also, lighting can be dimmed, glasses are removed, put them somewhere you're not going to step on them later. And then if you like some support behind your knees, a bolster behind your knees can be a nice accessory to help you become more passive in your body, which is helpful to the practice of pranayama, to really get the body in a very quiet, surrendered place. We're going to be working with 2 tri-folded blankets. So you want to open your blankets out to about this dimension. I'm not good at estimating. I'd say it's about 3 feet by 2 feet. And then you're going to, on the long end, tri-fold those, meaning it's like a zigzag or letter Z shape. When you tri-fold, it gives you even seams. If you folded it the other way, you'd have one lumpy side and one thinner side. So this is a kind of a neater way to fold them. And then we're going to do that twice. We are also going to be, we're not doing Brahmari, which is the bumblebee breath, but we are going to plug our ears. So you'll want to have your blocks out to each side so that you can have support for your elbows. so you don't have to hold your arms uncomfortably for a long period of time. So once you have your blanket set up, you can just take your blocks out to each side of your mat. So we've done the blanket setup a few times, but I always remind you kind of the shape of it, usually for pranayama, although we do play with this, is it's like a 4-tiered setup. So the first tier being your just flat mat. That's the first layer. The second tier, you have to make these proportions consistent with your own body. The second tier is really for the lumbar spine. The third tier is for the thoracic spine. And that's where the 2 blankets are stacked on top of each other. And then the final is, I call it a snail roll. I just roll the bulk of that excess blanket up to tilt my head toward my chest. And sometimes that piece is better done when you're already down, so that you know exactly what height you need. Make sure you're not going to be touching things with your hands besides the elbows that we want to use the props for later. We don't want stuff kind of crowding us or touching us, because it will kind of keep you out in the world rather than inside. And then you're going to lie down on that setup. So the butt is on your straight mat, plain mat. That little bit of layering there for your lumbar spine. Your next level is starting right at the rib cage. And then of course the head. You want your chest and chin to meet. Okay, so this part is a little cumbersome, but we're going to turn our blocks up so that we're able to, I don't know if you can see me, but you're able to plug your ears. And because we're not doing that mudra we do with Brahmari, it doesn't matter what finger you use to plug your ears. So when we do Brahmari, we use our thumbs, but if it's easier for your arms to remain effortless, to plug your ears with your index fingers, like for me, that's the case, do that. So you're going to plug your ears in whatever way is conducive to your body being the least amount of effort. My elbows are propped. It's actually more like my upper arms. So whatever part of your arm you need to prop so that you don't have to hold your arms in space, that's what you're going to do. So before we do that, before we plug our ears, hopefully you've set up, let's just make sure we have the body on the floor the way we want it. Roll the flesh of the butt away from your upper back. Make sure you're even on your props. Make sure your feet are a little bit wider than your hips and your legs are really passive. The reason we're going to plug the ears is so we can hear the breath. So I have to say this before we plug our ears so you can hear me. We can hear the breath, maybe, but we can hear other things. We can hear sometimes the heartbeat. We can hear like a vibration in the body. We can hear the blood flow. So it just kind of starts the process of taking us in. So I want you to just, now you can take your fingers and plug your ears and you're just going to listen. Okay, hopefully you can hear me. You're going to take your fingers out of your ears now. And I'm going to give you another direction. We're going to play with our ears being plugged for these pranayama practices, just to really listen in to what's happening in the body. So the first thing we're going to do is Ujjayi exhale. We know this pranayama technique. And when you have your ears plugged, you can hear really well the evenness, the smoothness, the delicate nature of this breath. And you might be comfortable doing it every exhale. You might need to separate the Ujjayi exhales with a full cycle of normal breathing. What you want to do though is watch the abdomen that you don't harden, and watch the sternum that you don't sink. So not only are you listening to your breath, you're applying yama. Prana is energy, yama is restraints. So you're applying some restraints. You're restricting the flow of the breath so it doesn't just flow out in one big loud exhale. You're restricting the abdomen from tightening. You're restricting the sternum from sinking. So whenever you're ready, you're going to plug your ears and you're going to practice 5 cycles of Ujjayi exhale. Beginning when you're ready with a full breath in, full breath out, and another full breath in. When you've come through the 5 exhalations, just sit with your breath, release the ears. We're going to practice the same 5 Ujjayi breaths, but this time with the inhale. Remembering that we're going to keep our belly with the spine when we breathe in rather than letting it inflate. And you're going to go for that same smooth, steady quality. Remembering Ujjayi is a very light constriction of the muscle in the throat, the same muscle we use to clear the throat, same muscle we use to say the sound ha, except the lips are sealed. And some people find challenges with the Ujjayi inhale versus the exhale. So just remember that with pranayama, it's all about soothing the nervous system. So if you find yourself getting frustrated or irritated, let it go and just come back to breath observation. So before we plug our ears, we always begin any pranayama attempt with a full in and out breath. And then you can go right into that first Ujjayi in breath. We're going to do 5. And when you're done, you can unplug your ears. Okay, so get yourself ready. Feel free to take that full in and out breath, and you can start on your own. If you've come out of the practice, the last thing we're going to do before Shavasana is do 3 cycles where we are applying Ujjayi inhale and Ujjayi exhale. Again, you might need to break those up with a full cycle in between those attempts. And you might need to modify this practice based on what you've already discovered. If you're not doing so well with either part of it, just customize it. Any version of 3 full cycles of Ujjayi breathing. And after, you're gonna, as gently as you can, move into lying flat on your back for Shavasana. So you can come right into your Shavasana after these 3 cycles. And we'll begin when we're ready. Remember to start with a full, not Ujjayi in breath, out breath before you begin. Feel free to still use something to support your head to keep your chin and your forehead level. Make sure you're warm enough. We'll just be here a couple minutes. Just resting in whatever remains after this practice of moving through tension in the brain, in the body, in the breath. This process of editing out what doesn't serve us, what isn't useful, what's no longer needed. And now the body is just passive. The breath is breathing you. You're no longer in the pranayama practices. You're just watching the body breathe on its own. You might choose to stay here for as long as you like. Otherwise, you might begin to welcome yourself out of the pose with some deeper breaths and maybe some gentle movement. Eventually moving to your side. From your side, eventually coming up to seated. Once seated, joining your hands together in front of your heart, taking a moment to acknowledge the effects of this practice, maybe setting an intention that this benefits of your practice today would serve others in some way. And let's take a deep breath in through the nose. Let it go. From the place within me that I know to be divine, I honor that place within each of you. Namaste.